Ashrei is one of the most important and one of the most focal prayers inside of the whole service, right? Shachris, we said in the morning, we said at Mincha time as well, that's how we begin the Mincha services. The Gemara actually says that if you recite Ashrei 3 times a day, you're promised to have you'll be a Ben Olam Haba, which means that you'll have a place in the world to come. Of course, it doesn't mean just to say it 3 times a day without any thought, without any without any intent, but rather to say it properly. The Gemara asks an interesting question: what's different about Ashrei from anything else? So the Gemara explains, because Ashrei has 2 things over here. First of all, it follows the Aleph Bet. So if you take a look in the Ashrei, if you take a look at the in the Art Scroll City, you'll see that if you flip over the page, going down, the first letter of every line is being put in bold, right? So it's following Aleph Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav, Zayin, right, until you get to the end. Although, if anybody here is going to be pedantic, and if everybody here knows the Aleph Bet well enough, you'll realize there's no nun over there. We'll talk about the missing nun in a minute. Huh?
There's none.
There's nun of nun. Yes.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, whatever's going to make you laugh, that's fine. Really, it's good.
There's none.
You're going to tell us why?
Like
Huh?
Liverpool.
Did you say are you going to tell us why?
Actually, it depends. I was going to, but when I heard that appalling pun,
I'm from Liverpool. There's none.
when I heard that appalling pun, I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe I won't. We'll have to see. I don't know. But
So punish the whole class on Ben's behalf.
Oh, it wasn't me. He punished the whole class on somebody else's behalf.
he's right.
It's quite-
The class has to be punished. We just have to find a reason why. That's all. Says Gemara, it follows the Aleph Bet, although it's missing. There are nuns over there. Oh gosh, you've got me doing it as well now. And because it says, if you take a look at about 2/3 of the way down, there's a verse that's been put onto 2 lines, and it says you have to concentrate when reciting. It's Poterech et Yodecha, which is considered to be very, very fundamental to our relationship with God. So says the Talmud that if you recite Ashrei that follows the Aleph Bet and it's got this Poterech et Yodecha, that's going to help you get into the world to come. So let's just try to understand what's the significance of the verse Poterech et Yodecha. What's the big deal about God opening His hands? So it's an idea Poterech et Yodecha Maspil L'chol Charatzon, that God takes care of everybody, which means that we have to learn and we have to internalize and we have to believe that God is taking care. He's giving us whatever we need. That's what He's giving us. It says Umasbiah L'chol Charatzon, that He satisfies everybody, right? We've got what we need. If only we would just look and see that, then we would be happy with what we've got. But we spend most of our time, living in a world where we're being told that we don't have what we want, and being bombarded with advertisements and subliminal messages that if you don't have this, then you can't be happy. And we end up not looking at what we've got at all. Right? And really, the pasuk over here is coming to try to teach us, first of all, take off a moment and see what you've got, and be thankful for what you've got, and realize that if God's given you this right now, then presumably that's what you need right now. Rav Shimon Schwab has an interesting insight over here. He says, Poterech et Yodecha, that we say God opens His hands. According to the verse, it's obvious that sometimes God's hands are closed and sometimes they're open. Otherwise, if God's hands were open the whole time, how would you say Poterech et Yodecha? It's not applicable, right? So I think that's also another rather telling insight. We imagine that God is forever giving us, without any restrictions whatsoever, and yet the verse is saying not like that. The verse is telling us Poterech et Yodecha. We're asking God to open His hand. That sometimes God's hands are closed, sometimes they're open, and we've got to try to tap into that divine dimension that will allow us to get God to open His hands to give us what we need. Right? Now again, is it okay to pray for things that you don't have? If you don't have a red Ferrari right now, then presumably God doesn't want you to have one. Is it okay to pray for one? So the answer is yes, it is. Right? It's absolutely fine. You can pray for whatever you want, but you just have to pray with the knowledge that if you're supposed to get it, then God will give it to you after you've asked for it, and if not, then you won't. But it's okay for God to say no. That's another pretty fundamental dimension in our relationship with God that comes through prayer, is that very often we make the mistake of thinking that if we, here we are, we've taken time off from our busy schedule to pray to God, the very least He can do is give us whatever we want, right? And it really doesn't work like that. It's not some kind of a, free pass that I'll pray and you'll give, but rather we've got to understand that God will give us whatever we need, what's good for us right now, and if something is not good, then He won't give it to us. That's fair enough, right?
What if we need it but we don't pray for it?
That's an interesting. I don't know. It's an interesting problem because if it's something which God wants you to have or God needs you to have, it's very conceivable that you'll get it anyway. However, if it's something which needs your input for you to have it, then it's conceivable that you won't get it if you don't pray for it. Which means it's very difficult, and of course we're not qualified to decide which is which. Right? So you can't sort of lie in bed and say, okay, if God wants me to have this, then I'm going to have it, because you've got no idea whether that's enough or whether God needs your input into all of this as well. That's what makes all of this as interesting as it is. There is a very cute story they tell. There was a very great rabbi from the previous generation called the Ponovitch Rav Kahanaman, and somebody once came to him and said to Rabbi, I pray and God's not listening to me. And the Ponovitch Rav said, yes, He is. He said, no. It's just, this outlook that we've got, this perception that we've got that if we pray for something, then God should give it to me. Right? It really doesn't work like that. And Potech et yodecha means that we've got to tap into that dimension. We need to be able to have a part of that. Yeah.
So let's say something is meant to be yours, right? The red Ferrari is meant to be mine, for example. Even if I don't pray for it, I'll get it. So what's the point of praying?
I don't know. Okay, that's really what you were asking just now. I don't think it's quite so simple. Which means that if the red Ferrari is I'll give you a Jewish joke. Now, Jewish jokes are often not very funny, but very deep, right? So this is like a classic Jewish humor. This fellow goes to the kotel every single day and he prays to God that he should win the lottery. For 25 years he's been doing this, and he never won. So finally the angels come to God and they say, look, we can't listen to this anymore. Just let him win, for goodness sakes. And God says, I'd love to, but he should buy a ticket first. which is, are you supposed to get it? You're supposed to get it, but you've got to put your 2 cents in there as well, right? Which means that if you would only make the effort, then God would give that red Ferrari to you. But if you're not going to make that effort, then God is not, perhaps He's not going to give it to you.
I'm going to have a job, and I'm not going to pray. If I'm meant to get it, I'll get it through my job.
Could be, right? Oh, so Poteches Yodechu Masbir Lechol Chai Ratzon is coming to teach you that you have a job and you can make lots of money, but you need to know that your income, your parnasa, is not coming directly from the people you're working from, but rather the people that you're working for. But the people that you're working for are a vehicle that allows God to give you your parnasa. Right? So you can earn lots and lots of money. That's not a problem, and you can be very successful at whatever you do. You should just remember where it's coming from. We say in Birkat HaMazon when we eat bread and we finish at the end, and we say, what's it called, grace or whatever it's called, benching. Yeah, we say that God who must be that we said God gives us our bread. It's true that your paycheck is coming through whoever you're working for. That's what you need to know, right? Which means that for sure, if you've got a good job and you're earning plenty of money, you should be thankful for the people who are employing you. That's for sure. But you should recognize that the ultimately your parnasa, your livelihood, is coming from God, and that's really what Poteches Yodecha means over here as well.
This part, the Posecha es Yodecha, that's praising Hashem. It's like asking for mercy, isn't it? That the first part of that, you open your hand.
Mate, I mean, it's like a declaration, right? Here, you open your hands and you satisfy the desires of all people.
It's acknowledging the true source.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that really ties into the Aleph base. What's the big deal about having a prayer that follows the Aleph base? So,
Easier to remember.
well, that's one possibility, but only if you know your Aleph base, right? If you are Aleph base challenged, then it's not going to help too much what order it's in. Huh?
I know the first 2 letters.
Okay, good. Here, so you've got the first 2 lines down pat. That's great, right? The other 20, well, we'll forget. We're 19 because there's no nun over here. But what's the idea? The idea is something it's really something very fundamental. It's also something very beautiful, I think. We imagine that the sequence from Aleph to Beis to Gimel to Dalet is something which is natural, right? Which means that Beis comes after Aleph, right? And Gimel comes after Beis, and Dalet comes after Gimel, because that's the way that it's supposed to be, right? But the way that the commentaries explain it is that God created a system whereby between the Aleph and the Beis, that gap in between the Aleph and the Beis is filled by God. And the gap between the Beis and the Gimel is filled by God. And the gap between the Gimel and the Dalet is filled by God, which means Beis only comes after Aleph because God is there to make the connection. Right? Gimel only comes after Beis because God is there to make the connection. And the prayer of Ashrei, because it's following the Aleph Beis, I think its most incredible idea is teaching us that even though something looks natural, that doesn't detract from how much God there is within inside of it. Right? We've spoken on this on many occasions, but I think it's something which the rabbis and the commentaries go over it. They repeat it in many different ways, in many different styles. But the bottom line of what we're learning is that there's nothing natural about nature, which means don't take things for granted. Allow yourself to live within the natural world. Allow yourself to understand how things work. That's fine. That's good. But also allow yourself the knowledge that this is a framework that God gave us within which to live. Right? Now, why is there no nun? If you follow down over here, so if you go halfway down the page, right? So you've got a chaf. It says Kvoid Malchuscha Yomeru, and then it says Lamed Lo Dia Livnei Adam, and then Malchuscha Malchus Kol Olamim, and then it jumps to Somech, and the nun has disappeared. Right? The missing nun. Sounds like an Agatha Christie novel of some kind, right? Well, what has happened? What has happened to the nun? So each word has got each letter has got a has got a dimension to it. It's got a meaning behind it. Each letter represents a concept. The letter nun represents a concept of nefila, to fall, right? Nefila. When we come to recite the Ashrei, we don't want to be reminded directly of the idea that we're going to fall. We'll come back to it in a minute. It's something which is going to happen, but we'll see. However, if you look at the verse which begins with the Samach, which is the letter that comes after the Nun, it's Somech Hashem L'chol Hanoflim. God supports all those that fall. The letter Samach represents the concept of support, and Nun represents the concept of falling. So interestingly enough, you want to hear a neat idea? I mean, I'm going to tell you anyway, so you may as well say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. But the word nace, what does a nace mean?
Miracle.
A miracle. The word nace is comprised of 2 letters, Nun and Samach. Nun represents a concept of nefila, of falling, and Samach represents a concept of support, which means where do miracles come from normally? The concept of a miracle is very simple. We do something that we shouldn't have done, and now God has to step in to try and support us through the mistakes that we've made. Right? So, when God makes miracles, what's the idea? The idea is very simple. In the Shema we say like this, that if we follow the ways of God, then nature will work in tandem together with us, which means everything will run smoothly and everything will run, in inverted commas, naturally. Right? So the rains will come, the crops will grow, everything will be wonderful. If we don't do what God wants us to do, then it won't be like that. Which means the concept of God stepping into the natural world and having to shift things around a little bit in order to help us out means that we've done something we shouldn't have done, and now God is coming to support us and get us back on track again.
That's true. What you're describing?
What I'm describing right now is a nace. What triggers off the nace is normally tshuva. However, in national circumstances, it's conceivable that the Jewish people aren't overly tshuva orientated, right? And nevertheless, God will step in order to help things out because the situation is very dire. Right? So the idea of sorry?
That's the part
in the Shema, yeah. But that's only when we're doing what we're supposed to do, right? Which means that if we follow God's will, then everything will be great. And if we don't, then things won't be great. That's what the Shema spells out very, very clearly, right? And that's what Ashrei, that's really the function of Ashrei over here, is to teach us that God is with us everywhere. And even when we fall, God is going to be there, hopefully, supporting us not too far along. We shouldn't fall too far. The question over here is perhaps, just as a little aside, falling, perhaps we should be pitching not to fall. Right? Why does it have to be understood that we're going to fall, and that's why the nun is taken out of Ashrei and surreptitiously placed into the verse with the samach, just to give us that sort of sense of security? So the answer is a verse. King Solomon writes that Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'kam, that people fall over. What can you do, right? People fall over. That's what happens. You know, we make mistakes, which means one of the beauties of Judaism is that no one's expecting you to be perfect. No one's expecting you to come out of this without having made any mistakes on the way. The question is not whether you're going to make any mistakes. The question is, how am I going to react after I've made the mistake? What now? Am I going to be able to grow from my mistake? Or am I going to get sucked further in and not be able to get myself out of there? And that's what King Solomon is saying. King Solomon says, Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'kam, that a tzaddik falls over 7 times and he gets up. And the number 7 is not literal. The number 7 is a natural number, which means it's perfectly natural for people to trip up and to make mistakes, right? What we have to do is learn from our mistakes. So Rav Hutner, one of the greatest philosophers and thinkers from the previous generation, Rav Hutner says that fools think from that verse, Sheva Yipol Tzadik V'kam, that a tzaddik falls over, a righteous person falls over 7 times and gets up. He says fools think that because he's righteous, that's why he got up. But that's not what the verse is saying. The verse is teaching that he became a tzaddik because he got up. Right? Which means that growth is going to be measured in, we make mistakes, so we dip down a little bit, and then we pull ourselves up. Right? If you think like a heart machine, like a heart monitor, right? That you dip down and you go up, right? And that's what our lives are all about, and that's really what Ashrei is coming to try to teach us over here, that we have that connection with God. It's there the whole time. Are we going to make mistakes? We'll make mistakes on the way. That's okay, right? Just, you know, if we're already having a look at Ashrei in a slightly deeper way than we've been looking at the other things up until now, there are 3 verses that talk about monarchy, that talk about God's kingdom, and they are the 3 verses. The first one begins with the word chof, kvoid malchutcha yomeru, and the second one is lo ideh livnei adam gvoisov uchvoid hadar malchuto. These are all references to God's monarchy, to God's reign over us. And the third one is malchutcha, malchut kol olamim, right? The same idea. It's interesting that the letters chof, lamed, and mem are the letters that spell out the word melech. Right? Melech means king, right? And the 3 letters that deal with the concept of monarchy are the 3 letters that spell out the word melech. So we're already talking about being a king. Just one last little idea over here, which I think is something really very beautiful. Mem lamed chaf, melech. Mem, say the rabbis, it stands for moach, which is your brain. Lamed stands for leiv, which is your heart. And chaf stands for kaved, which is your liver. Or klayot, your kidney.
Liver?
Liver. Kaved. Yeah. What's a connection? The rabbis explained that those three things denote three different dimensions of a person. Your brain is your intellect. Your lave is your open desires, right? The emotions that a person has. And your kaved is the place of your deep set desires. So explain the rabbis, it's a very beautiful idea. A melech, we can all be a king. What is a melech? A melech is somebody who can control himself. Right? If a person begins with his intellect, and from his intellect he can then control his emotions, and from his emotions he can control his desires. Right? The other way around doesn't normally work, which is a person who works according to their emotional reactions to things is not normally somebody who's able to control himself very well. Anyway, I thought that was pretty neat, but looking around the room, I can see that there aren't too many people who...
They didn't get kaved. What does kaved
your,
represent?
your kaved is your innermost desires, right? What does your liver do? Your liver is really a filtering point for the blood. Right, the blood goes flowing through your liver and it comes out the other side, right? Your blood is something which represents the concept of tremendous desire. Right? Somebody who's hot-blooded is somebody who's,
It's a little different than the thought of like a mental, spiritual, and physical. It's close to that. But
yeah,
it's a little
in a
different.
certain way, right? Which means, I guess, it's mental, emotional, and physical, perhaps, instead of the spiritual. The lave is coming to over here. The emphasis is being placed on the emotions.
So it's almost saying to be a king, you don't need to be spiritual. I guess it's saying.
You know what? It's interesting. The function of the king inside of Judaism was not to be spiritual, but was to be physical. It's an interesting insight. I've never thought about it, but Lamaisa, that's what used to happen, right? What was the function of the king was to make sure that the citizens had whatever they needed physically, right? The function, and that's why the kingship and the high priestship, for example, were never mixed together, right?
But the king needed his high priest.
Of course, there was like a balance between the two, which means that the high priest was there to make sure that the king didn't overstep his mark, and the king was there to make sure that the high priest didn't overstep his. And it's what is fascinating from all of that is that on top of all of that, normally you have a prophet, a Navi, right? Who's sort of like making sure that everything is running properly, right? So a Navi could come to the king and say, listen, what you're doing is incorrect. A Navi can come to the high priest and say, listen, what you're doing is incorrect, right? Which means he's sort of like the ultimate arbiter over here,
Supreme Court.
in a certain way, right?
What made
king's
Shaul
executive.
Amelech kill all the Kohanim? What
He was consumed with jealousy in Nov. He was
Kill all the
consumed.
Kohanim?
He was
I mean-
consumed because they helped King David, and King David he was consumed with jealousy about the fact that King David was going to take over from
his
him,
place, right.
and Jonathan wasn't going to be able to take his place.
Yeah, but I mean,
So
he knew the dinim. I mean,
They look. He looked.
and everything. Why would he?
He
go ahead and
looked.
kill
He
him?
looked at it as being they were rebelling against the king. That's how he understood it. Even though King David led them to believe that he was actually fulfilling he was on a shlichus. He was on how do you say that? He was a mission. Thank you from King Saul. Nevertheless, King Saul wasn't being rational. He wasn't being
That
logical.
was something that always baffled me. Well, he killed all the Kohanim.
It's an interesting insight into human nature, actually. That whole story over there. Yeah.
Is it kavod that is liver?
Say again.
Is it kavod? Kavod?
Kavod.
Kavod.
Yeah.
Kavod. That it and it's the strongest of our desire.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's also the
Yes.
nearest to the soul. The blood is what's being purified is
Through the liver.
the closest to the part of us that's to the soul.
Part of your first of all, there's a whole bunch of word connections over here, but before the word connections, there's a part of your soul is found in the blood. You know, there are 5 dimensions to the soul. 3 of them are found within the body. 2 of them are outside of the body, on top of the body, connecting us in spiritual terms up to God. But one of the things that we have, one of the dimensions that we have, is found in the blood. The word kaved which means your liver, also means heavy, right? In Hebrew, if something is kaved, it's heavy, right? And kavod means honor. And the desire for honor, it's an interesting thing. The desire for honor, the rabbis explain that the desire for honor is one of the things that it's almost spiritual. Even though it's a negative thing, it's almost a spiritual-like dimension, because kavod, honor, is something which is never satiated. There's a fascinating idea over here. You know, when a person has physical desires, so, you know, how many does it take until you're done for the moment, right? So, you know, a person desires steak. A person's crazy about steak. So how many steaks does he have to eat until he can't eat another steak for now? And it'll wear off, right? But at some point, right now, so he's eaten how many? 3, 5, 10, I don't know, right? You're a college student. You've got a desire for, you know, for beer, right? So how many kegs of beer can you drink before that's it. You're not going to drink anymore until tomorrow, right? Until you wake up again, whatever it is, right?
That has a lot to do with the liver.
You know what? I guess that was an unintentional connection over there. But but you hear the idea. Physical desires that we have, at some point you'll be satiated, right? You can't. You know, your body can only take as much as it can take, and it can't take more than that. Kavod, honor, is something which has an unlimited amount of ability for the person to absorb. It's a fascinating thing, it really is. And the sages explain that kavod is something which is almost spiritual in its makeup. And that's why kavod is such an incredibly dangerous thing, because however much a person has got, it's not going to be enough. There's an incredible, the Gemara says that God was speaking to one of the wickedest kings. I can't remember. Maybe it was Menashe. Maybe it was Achav. I can't remember. And he says, "You and me and you and Ben Yishai, which is King David, will, you know, if you do tshuva, we'll wander around. We'll have a little ramble in the Garden of Eden, right?" And the king says to him, "Mi kodem, who's first?" God's already said, "You and Ben Yishai," which means it's clear that he's saying, if you do tshuva, then you'll move into pole position, right? But he wanted to hear it again. Right? It's an astonishing thing. No, you would have thought that once is probably enough. No, you would have thought. I mean, it's like for some, I don't know. For some people, it's difficult to understand this pursuit for honor. The desire for honor is something for us. It's very difficult to understand.
Is kavod the same word in the Pirkei Avos, the three things?
Yes, 100%. Shloish
kavod.
advar moitin es adam min ha'olam. Ha'kina va'taiva va'kavod motin es adam min ha'olam. Right? It's a mission in Pirkei Avot. There are three things which destroy a person, right? A kina, which is jealousy, a ta'ava, which is desire, physical desires, the kavod, which is honor. And it's interesting that, you know, that the simple understanding of the Mishnah over there is that it says, they take a person out of the world. The simple understanding is the world to come. The Sfas Emes, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes, the second Rebbe from Gur, he says like this, no, he says that these people, they don't live in this world. They can't function. They don't interact with people properly because they're so consumed with whatever it is that they're pursuing, that they are completely and absolutely irrational, illogical people, and they're impossible to be around. And they lose their connection.
In the what is it, ways of the tzaddikim, the gates, each chapter.
Yeah.
Honor, I think, follows pride.
Yeah.
Pride is the first.
Yeah.
I think honor is like maybe
Yeah.
not the second, but it's like right up there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Pretty
it's
similar, no?
yeah.
Pride's a vague term. I've studied pride in Pirkei Avot. It's just kind of like a vague thing. It seems hard to describe.
Pride, it's interesting. Pride is also something, but it's however vague it is, it's incredibly destructive. Which means pride stops a person from being able to recognize the input of other people around them. Like the very prideful people are very difficult people to be around. And it's interesting that I think honor is also a pretty vague dimension, because one person gets excited about one thing and another person doesn't really understand why he's excited about that, but he gets excited about something else, and they're all related to each other.
How would you kind of sum them up if you had to?
Which, honor
Pride
or
and honor,
pride?
like, how would you really?
I think in simple terms, right, in basic terms, pride is something which blocks your ability to see God. Right, which means that pride is something that I think I did it myself, right? Which means that I'm excluding not just God, but I'm excluding the people around me as well, right? If you ever worked in a group environment, right? And you know that when a group gets something done, as a rule, it's the group that did it, right? But there always seems to be somebody there who says, it was my idea and I implemented it, and they're very, very difficult people to be around. It's true also in sports as well, teams. Any kind of a team setup, unless you've got a very professional group who are perfectly aware that each one can't get where they need to get to without the other, you're going to end up with somebody who thinks he's better than everybody else and who thinks that he's deserving of all of the praise that's going to be given when this thing is finally done.
That's what I was just thinking right before you said that, because in some athletes they do something like an individual accomplishment and they go, it was very humbling.
Yeah.
For this to happen.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like being humble is almost the opposite of pride.
Yes, I think so. Humble is the acknowledgement that you need other things and people around you to make something happen. Which means the fellow who scores that final goal, which wins whatever, the league or the cup or whatever it is, if he's smart, then he'll say it was a humbling experience, because it really is, because you couldn't have done that without the team all around you, which means it's not you. You just happen to be the one who scored the goal at the end, but it's a whole process that gets you to there. If anybody's ever played on a team where you've got somebody who's not like that, right? You'll know that it's difficult because they don't pass the ball and they think they can do everything by themselves, and they're very. If that's anybody sitting over here, then I truly apologise for having suggested that there's something wrong with your interpersonal, intersocial skills, but there definitely is. There's no doubt about it. Right? It's a problem. It is. It's not easy to be around people like that. It's really not. It is refreshing, especially when you've got professional sports people, right? And when you've got very successful businessmen. It's very refreshing to hear how they laud everyone around them, and it was a group, and we did it all together. And
there's a football player in America that got filmed saying how he was the best and how much better he was than everybody, and it made his victory just so it ruined the whole thing.
Yeah.
People were so happy for the team, but then he came out on camera saying this, and then the team lost all this support.
The sad thing is that even if it were true, let's say, for example, I imagine in a team, probably one person is better than everyone else, right? You've got sports stars that stick out as being, so incredibly talented, but they have to understand that without everybody else around them, then they would never become who they became. It's not possible.
Ali? He was very prideful, but he was also really good, and he wasn't a team.
That's why he was playing in a sport which there was only him. And I would imagine that he was probably I don't know, but I would imagine he was probably a very difficult person to be around. I would imagine. I think people that play individual sports that don't learn how to integrate together with others. It is definitely a possibility that they're going to be difficult to live with.
Someone named Muhammad causing us difficulties? No way.
Nah. His real name was Cassius Clay, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Cassius Clay.
Yeah.
My father, alav shalom, he was a runner. He was an athlete in university, in Oxford University. And he ran together with somebody called Roger Bannister, which is before your time. But Roger Bannister was the first person who broke the 4-minute mile. And my father was never that good, right? But he ran together with him. They both ran for the college. And he used to pace him. Right? When you've got real good I don't know if you know anything about running, but if you've got real good athletes, they need to be paced to make sure that they don't use up their energy too far along. As my father would go out ahead of the pack, and he would know that he had to be a certain distance behind him, and then when it got towards the end, he would just, my father said, really just effortlessly, actually, would just move ahead and overtake everybody and win the race. And my father said it was interesting. You know, everybody told Roger Bannister it can't be done, that it's physically impossible for a human being to break the 4-minute mile. And he just kept doing it. He just kept trying and trying and trying until finally he did it. And today, of course, any international miler, you know, if you can't break a 4-minute mile, then there's no way that you're going to be competing internationally. It's not shaykh, right? But my father always said, it's interesting that my father always said, because running is a pretty solitary sport, right? You know, either you run for yourself, unless you're running in a relay team, right? But you're really running for yourself. And he always said that Roger Bannister was like the most charming gentleman. You know, at the end of the races, he would always come and thank my father for having paced him and allowed him to keep his energy to be able to get ahead and win the race. And I think that's a very wonderful reflection on the person.
It probably made him a better athlete too, because like loving the sport and loving the people that you do it with, it changes the way you train. It changes the way.
I guess so. It's also, again, I think we're back to the concept of the knowledge that without this fellow pacing you, then the chances are that you wouldn't be able to do it properly. You'd expend your energy too early, and you would just burn out. But there is an union of being able to integrate and being able to be together with other people. It's a really very fundamental thing. Maybe that's one of the reasons behind the concept of a minyan, right? We spoke about this the other day. You know, that the Mishnah Berurah says that however well you pray at home, it's still better to go to the synagogue and pray together with a minyan, together with the community, because that's where you belong. Even if I pray better at home than I do with the community, right? Because my place is together with everybody else. I need to integrate in and be a part of everybody else. That's a pretty, you know, maybe how can we squeeze this back into Ashrei? So maybe the idea is that, again, the Aleph base, we've got 22 letters over here, but it only becomes the alphabet when everybody comes together. All these letters come together to become one entity, to become one unit.
Like no other part of Sukkot Zimru, for me, when I read Ashrei and I follow the commas and I say it in Hebrew, it's poetic. There's this rhythm that you don't ordinarily get.
It's very poetic. It's interesting. It's interesting that you say that, because an awful lot of Sukkot Zimra, of all of it's really coming from the book of Tehillim, from Psalms. Most of the things that we say over here, and the book of Psalms in general is a very, very poetic book, but there are some things which are obviously more poetic than others. Right? There are some things which are they just have a certain something to them that the others don't have, and Ashrei is one of them. It has a certain lyricism to it, a certain tempo to it, that it turns it into something more song-like. And interestingly enough, if you just flip back to page 66, it's called a Tehillah LeDavid. A Tehillah is a psalm. It's the only psalm in the book of Psalms that's called a Tehillah. None of the rest have a title. Tehillah LeDavid, right? You can have Mizmor LeDavid, you can have a song to David, right? But you don't have anything. Nothing else is called a Tehillah. So I saw once an interesting idea that there are 150 words in Ashrei, not including the first two lines over here, which don't really belong to the Tehillah LeDavid, which is kapitel. It's chapter 145. That begins with the words Tehillah LeDavid. There are 150 words in the chapter, and there are 150 chapters in Tehillim. It's as if Ashrei is like a concentrated version, right, of the whole of the book of Tehillim, the whole of the book of Psalms. It's something very special, something very significant. Good. Okay. I mean, somebody could have said "wow" or something, or "ooh."
Wow.
Thank you.
Sometimes
Okay.
silence in the crowd actually means the most.
Yeah, you got it backwards.
Thank you. I believe I do. Yeah.
With respect.
After that, uplifting and inspiring moment. So Ashrei, that's why Ashrei is such an important part of Sukkot Zimra. So what did we learn the other day, right? We learned that if you don't have any time and you need to recite the minimum of Pesukei Zimra, of this opening part of the prayers in Shacharit, in the morning service, you should say Baruch She'amah, Ashrei, and Yishtabach. And Baruch She'amah and Yishtabach we understand because that's the first blessing and the last blessing. And Ashrei is the part in the middle that's going to give us the significance of Pesukei Zimra, right, in a very contained method, right, if we don't have time to recite everything that we're supposed to recite. Maybe just one last idea about the Book of Psalms, we're already talking about it. The Book of Psalms is actually split up into 5 different books. Which is interesting because there are 5 books of Moses as well, right? The Chamishei Chumshe Torah, the Torah itself is split up into 5 books. And the Book of Psalms is considered to be like a parallel to the Torah itself. The Torah, of course, is very difficult to understand, and we expend a lot of energy and a lot of intellectual toil in trying to understand it properly. And the Book of Psalms is something which is a lot easier. That's why, when you go to the Kotel, you'll see people sitting over there, they're reciting Psalms. It doesn't matter whether it's a famous, scholarly rabbi or whether it's somebody who hardly knows anything at all. The Book of Psalms seems to speak to everybody. It seems to touch everybody in a spiritual way. It touches them and it connects to them, and everybody's got their own chapter in Psalms, which is the one that speaks to them particularly. And it's a very beautiful compilation of different prayers. After Ashrei, we've got a series of different Psalms now. 146, 147. We're going in order. 148, 149. Again, if you have time, you should be saying all of these things, right? But if you don't, and you've got a little bit more time left after you've recited Baruch She'amah and Ashrei, we spoke about the other day, Mizmor LaTodah, right? That you recited that as well. So then you should go back and you should say Yi Chavod, which is the paragraph which is recited before Ashrei, and then you should flip forwards to to Psalm number 150, and you should recite that as well. It's just what's more important, what's less important in the Seder in the order of priorities. If you've got the time, you should say this. If you can say 150, you should say that as well. If you've got time after that, go back to the Psalms after Ashrei, and 147 and 148 and 149. You should recite those as well in order. There is inside of the halacha, if you can.
Go to the next and then go back to the first one.
No, go to the first and then go forwards. Okay. So after you've done 150, go back to 147, and then if you've got a little bit more time, 148. The halacha says like this, again, for those people who are capable of praying, and they have, again, so it could be that over here it's not, what I'm saying is not really applicable right now because it's too much and it's too, what's the word? Too. I've lost the word.
Too much.
That was the word, much. Thank you. It's just too much, right? That for somebody who is capable of being able to recite all of these things, they just don't have time right now because they're trying to keep up together with everybody else. So at the end of davening, you should go back, and everything you've missed out, you should add in later on after you finish your prayers, just to make up for everything that you haven't said.
There's something about it. I remember that if you would say the ashes, all the ashes, you live long.
It says if you say 3 ashrays, then you'll have a place in the place you'll be a ben olam haba. That's not bad, right?
Is it the only thing that guarantees a place?
It's interesting. It's
like
the
I've
only
heard this
you've heard it before. It's the only thing in the Gemara that speaks in the terms that it speaks, which means it says muvtach loy. It's a Gemara in Brachos says muvtach loy shul ben olam haba. That it means that somebody who recites Ashrei in the correct way is promised that he'll be a ben olam haba. What is a ben olam haba? Right? A son of the world to come, which means it's in most other places in the Talmud it will say that you have a chelik in olam haba. You'll have a portion of the world to come. Here it says you're a ben olam haba, which means that you're living a life over here which reflects the concept of the world to come. Ben olam haba is something else, right? Having a chelek in olam haba means that, okay, you've reserved yourself a seat up there, right, or a table up there when the time comes. But a ben olam haba is somebody who here in this physical world is leading a life which reflects that spiritual dimension, right? Which means that he's living a life of olam haba here in the physical world. And that really ties back into this idea of God filling up all the gaps, that we should know that there are no gaps in our lives, that God fills up every single gap. He's there, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to be tapped into that in order to be able to feel that, right? In order to be able to live that. It's not an easy thing to do. It's certainly not on a continual basis, but it's something which we do need to do. That's for sure. Good. We're going to stop over here.